SMS Emden was a Dresden-class cruiser of the Imperial German Navy, launched in 1909. The ship spent most of its active life in the Far East, being based in Qingdao, where Germany leased a small area of territory from China. With the outbreak of World War I, the ship was deployed to capture enemy ships and disrupt the commerce of the foe. The Emden captured almost 24 ships and took part in the Battle of Penang, where she sunk the Russian cruiser Zemchug and the French destroyer Musquet. Fresh from the victory at Penang on the 28th of October 1914, the ship sailed for the tiny Cocos Islands in the Indian Ocean on the 9th of November to attack a wireless and telegraph cable installation on Direction Island at 6 a.m. Although they succeeded in this, the station was able to transmit a distress call before surrendering. The HMAS Sydney departed from escorting a convoy, and the two ships clashed in the Battle of Cocos. The Emden fired first, around 9:20 a.m, surprising the Australians with the range of her guns, but the Sydney was more heavily armed, and by 11:20 a.m. the Emden was critically damaged, and the captain ordered the ship beached on North Keeling Island before it sank. The shore party of about 50 men, who had been unable to be evacuated before the appearance of the Australian ship, commandeered a schooner and were able to sail to freedom, eventually reaching Constantinople. Of the crew of the Emden, 134 were killed and 226 captured. The ship remained where it beached, gradually being destroyed by the waves. By 1919 it had broken up and the wreck submerged. In the 1950s, a Japanese salvage company took what remained of use. A number of artefacts were removed from the ship before it broke up, including 3 of its guns, a shell case, an iron rivet, and uniforms which were taken for display in Australia. Another of the items retrieved was the ship's bell. The bell of the Emden was originally cast for a wooden boat in the 19th century. The city of Emden presented it to the naval vessel when it was built as a gift. The bell had a piece broken out of it by a shell during the battle, but was considered a treasured prize, and was kept polished to a high lustre. It was taken to Garden Island Naval Dockyard in Sydney in 1917, and bolted to a mounting in the main doorway of the Executive Building on the island. There it remained until the 10th of August 1932, when it suddenly disappeared. At first, authorities were reluctant to state the bell had been stolen, saying it must have been borrowed, possibly thinking some sailors were playing a prank. It was believed that those responsible must have had inside knowledge to get away with their caper. The bell was heavy, weighing 100 pounds, and was about 2 feet high, and although it was possible for one man to move it, more likely it was thought it would require 2 to handle it. It was estimated that undoing the bolts would have taken several minutes, and although the area was poorly lit at night, there were numerous naval police around the island. A thorough search was made of the island which disclosed nothing. Finally, on the 3rd of September, the news broke across Australia that the bell was missing. Months passed with no news, and it seemed as if the bell was destined to remain missing, until suddenly on the 1st of February 1933, following a tip-off a few days earlier, police and intelligence agents located the bell. A German man claimed he had purchased the bell for £150, not realising it was stolen property. When he found out the truth, he panicked and buried the bell. The bell was dug up from underneath a foot of earth in a hollow near the women's baths, on the eastern side of the Domain, in Sydney, which faced Garden Island. Although it had tarnished following time in the soil, the bell was otherwise undamaged. A German man had told officials the bell could have sold in Berlin for thousands of pounds as a curio, if smuggled out of Australia. The bell had been retrieved, but the identity of the thief remained a mystery. To provide better safekeeping for the bell, it was handed over to the Australian War Memorial Museum in Prince Alfred Park on the 10th of March 1933. There it was bolted to a pedestal in the naval section to ensure it stayed put. Incredibly, the bell was stolen again less than 2 months later. On the 28th of April 1933, officials found the iron bar which held it to its mount had been sawn through. The bell was last definitely seen on Anzac Day, the 25th of April, but they were certain it would have been missed had it been taken before the 28th. A museum officer was stationed just 30 feet away from the bell during opening hours, between 10 a.m. and 5 p.m. It was deduced the theft had occurred early that morning. None of the other exhibits had been touched, and there was no sign of a forced entry into the museum. The theory was that 2 or 3 men had hidden somewhere in the building and avoided the search made at closing time by staff and the 2 night watchmen who patrolled the building. It was assumed a gang was involved, as in addition to its weight, the bell was awkward to hold and move. It was thought that the bell would be taken to Germany to sell. While the press suggested the same thieves could have struck twice, police discounted any link between the 2 thefts. With the rise in nationalist sentiment in Germany, it was conjectured that somebody believed the bell belonged in its homeland. It was also feared the bell may have been melted down for scrap value. A month after the second disappearance, a rumour spread that the bell had been sold for £160 and was being shipped secretly back to Germany. Ships were searched in Melbourne, Fremantle and Port Adelaide, but nothing was located. Officials in Germany were alerted to the event by the Consul General, and it was promised that searches would be made of ships there which had come from Australian ports, and if the bell found, it would be returned to Sydney. A report noticed by a curator in Perth in a German newspaper sparked a momentary scandal. It was reported that a church in Roth, near Koblenz, was getting a new bell melted down from the Emden's bell. By an odd coincidence, the bell belonged to another Emden. One was commissioned as soon as the first sunk, and since then the German Navy has possessed 3 more, the latest built in 1979. One of the ships was searched again in Antwerp in June, and again the search failed to find the elusive bell. By the end of June, police announced they believed the bell was still in Australia and sought a man in Newcastle for questioning. Nothing eventuated, and in September 1933, officials in San Francisco and Vancouver were asked to search ships which might be carrying the bell. Police publicly named the man they believed was responsible: German-born Charles Kaelmel. Kaelmel had come to Australia in 1925, after he claimed he had deserted from the French Foreign Legion. Kaelmel was then working in Melbourne on the building of the Shrine of Remembrance. The worldwide dragnet extended to Budapest, Sofia and other European capital cities, but finally on the 17th of November 1933, an arrest was made in Sydney's Hyde Park. Newspaper headlines blared that the bell was in America and had sold for $20,000. It might have sold papers, but the truth was less glamorous. 30-year-old motor mechanic Charles Kaelmel was charged with stealing the bell, given a nominal value of £5. Although as a relic of Australia's first naval battle, its historic value was priceless. Kaelmel had stolen the bell from Garden Island, using a motorboat to reach the island and sneaking ashore before returning to an unemployed camp in the Domain, and claimed he had returned it when his friends refused to buy it, knowing it to have been stolen. Then he stole it again and told questioning detectives that this time they would never find it. The second theft had been planned apparently in revenge for the way he felt he had been treated after he had returned the bell the first time. He had worn a leather apron to the war memorial to appear to be a workman. The bell had a bag placed over it and was then taken to a men's toilet, the door of which he had propped open. From the toilet it was taken down the fire escape to a truck he had hired and driven away. The bell was shipped to Melbourne under one of his aliases. A week before his case was due in court, Kaelmel married his girlfriend, Constance Watts. In court on the 5th of December, a friend of Kaelmel's, Gertrude Stokes, said the man she knew as Charles King had told her that he and 2 sailors had removed the bell from Garden Island the first time it was taken. Found guilty, Kaelmel was sentenced to 6 months' jail. Following his sentence, workmates from the Shrine of Remembrance in Melbourne, who knew him by the name of W.C. Watts, spoke of him as the laziest loafer on the project, a man with soft hands, seemingly unused to manual labour, who had once cried piteously when threatened with the sack, so convincingly that the foreman relented. He wore fine clothes and acted like a gentleman, despite allegedly being destitute. They recalled how he had suddenly quit the job just before 3 Commonwealth agents arrived to question him, apparently alerted by his soon-to-be wife. Cowmell appealed the sentence and was freed on bail. Further charges followed later in December when he was charged with fraudulently converting £70 belonging to Gertrude Stokes and with 3 counts of dole fraud. A journalist working for the Sydney Morning Herald received information on where the bell was hidden, and plans for that man, his informant, and authorities to recover it were hastily arranged. His informant was Charles Cowmell, who was desperate for money to pay back the £70 he owed Gertrude Stokes to ease his legal troubles. The bell was recovered on the 29th of December 1933. Just as before, Cowmell had buried it, this time in Royal Park, not far from Melbourne Zoo. The party from Sydney arrived, and wishing to retrieve the bell in secret, waited until 3 a.m. to start digging. Under a waning moon they dug into the earth until, after only 15 minutes, one of their spades made a metallic clang 4 feet down. Relieved, they uncovered the object and loaded it into their car, just as dawn was breaking, and began the journey north to Sydney, where the bell was lodged securely in a vault. On the 9th of February, Cowmell was acquitted of the charges related to Gertrude Stokes, although he had cancelled his appeal and was serving his original sentence. Ever the mystery man, Charles Cowmell, who also went by the names Carl and Otto, and the surnames King, Watts, Cornell and Kalman, slipped into obscurity after 1934. As for the bell, it was sent back to the War Memorial, despite a small but vocal call for it to be returned to Germany, led by ex-New South Wales Police Commissioner James Mitchell, and backed by famed aviator Sir Charles Kingsford Smith. The Emden's nameplate had already been given back to Germany in 1933. The bell was placed back on exhibition in May 1934, or so everyone was told. It's joked that when it was returned, a little old lady hurried in and asked an attendant, "Will you please show me where the Emden bell is? I'd like to see it before it is stolen again." In fact, it was a duplicate, which remained on display for the next 40 years, in Sydney, and after the War Memorial moved to its current location in Canberra in 1941. Today the real bell is again on display for visitors to see and reflect on its adventures at sea, during battle, and in the dark corners of history.